Before I start my talk, I would like to show you a video and take you back in time to 1993, when we first discovered the internet.
Oh, that's
that little mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At?
See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard it.
Around.
I'd never heard it said. I'd always seen the mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
I heard around big fight up in the lunchroom the other week.
There it is. Violence at NBC. GE.com. I mean,
well, Allison should know.
What is internet anyway?
Internet is that
massive computer network.
The one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No.
What does it mean?
It's a giant computer network made up of started from.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us what this was.
It's like a computer billboard.
It's not it's a computer billboard, but it's nationwide. And it's several universities and everything all joined together.
Right.
And others can access it.
Right.
And it's getting bigger and bigger all the time.
It came in really handy during the quake. A lot of people, that's how they were communicating out to tell family and loved ones they were okay because all the phone lines were down.
I was telling Katie and I was
But you don't need a phone line to operate internet?
No.
So I guess it reminds us of something. It's very similar to the discussions we're having today about blockchain. So what is blockchain?
Blockchain. The word seems to be on everyone's lips these days. It's the slightly mysterious techno-wizardry behind cryptocurrencies you may have heard of, like Bitcoin. With near religious fervor, the blockchain believers say it's the biggest thing since the internet. A revolutionary technology that's going to remake the future.
This is one of those key technologies that is actually decentralizing and democratizing innovation itself.
They proclaim that it will make our food safe, our money secure, our medical records inviolable, our online identities truly ours.
What blockchain does very, very well is manage transactions of information, and it does so by securing them as they occur.
It will bypass banks, lawyers, and a million other middlemen, along with their stiff fees, and bring the most disenfranchised people the world over into the global economy.
According to IHS Markit, they expect 10% of the world's GDP to be stored on blockchains by the year 2025.
But is blockchain the game changer it's touted to be? And what does it mean for you?
It's alarming at the pace with which it's happening, and it's happening in virtually every single jurisdiction.
Let the oversimplification begin. Let's talk about how we manufacture trust today. In order to talk about trust so that you can really get a sense as to what I mean by blockchain is going to change the way we trust, let's imagine that we're about to buy a house. Now, we have invented this thing in society called the ledger. No, not Heath Ledger. The ledger, like bookkeeping, entries, debits, and credits. And the ledger is the fundamental way that we go about storing information about transactions today. For this house, for example, if we needed to get a record of who owns this house and what happens to it, we would store that information in a ledger that looks like this. First, the house is built, then it's constructed, and there are some changes that go with it. It had some violations here and there, but eventually we'd be able to get a record of this house before we buy it. Anyone here ever bought a house or sold a house? How long does it take to get this information? You have to go to a title company. 30% of the titles in the United States have errors in them. The problem with the ledgers that we use today, which we depend on to trust, many things, not just houses, is that someone, as easily as they can write a record on the ledger, they can delete a record from the ledger. Can you imagine buying a house and you go to the homeowner and they go, yes, of course, here's the title. I've kept all the records of the title. Please have it. Would you trust them? No, because the information can be tampered with. The ledgers that we use today to transact with, whether it's a house, a car, the rights to some piece of art, someone who owns a piece of intellectual property or a patent, are tamperable. You can tamper with them. And what makes it worse is not only are they tamperable as in you can remove a record, you could also add a record or edit a record. As you can see here, that chimney violation that happens to this house somehow magically is now a new chimney. I bet you'd be paying a price you don't want to pay for that house. So we have this capability called a ledger. We use it, it's tamperable, and we could trust a little bit, but we're sort of in this state of commerce where we have to trust but verify. Anybody knows who said trust but verify? All right, good. We'll add it to the comment section as well. Okay? The truth is, today, as a civilization, when we start companies or we start transactions, we start with an automatic assumption that the counterparty cannot be trusted. When we start companies or we start transactions today, we start with the automatic assumption that the counterparty cannot be trusted. It almost feels normal to us. Kind of feels like, oh yeah, I mean, why would we not do that? What does it have to be that way? It's just something that we've become accustomed to. And the way we've gone about it is we establish these things called intermediaries. It's a fancy word for middlemen and middlewomen. Intermediaries. These are entities that are responsible for keeping a centralized copy of the ledgers in all of commerce, and they facilitate the brokering of the relationship between those who are looking to trust and those who are looking to be trusted. Examples of intermediaries are things like banks. The Department of Motor Vehicle, it's a great intermediary for identity. Mortgage, title companies. Credit reporting agencies. These are all intermediaries. This is just a small example of the intermediaries that we deal with today. And the reason why we deal with them is because we simply can't trust the ledgers that we have. Now, the intermediaries don't actually get us all the way there. If you think about operating in zero trust, which commerce would come to a stalling halt, and abundant trust, the intermediaries kind of get us to a point where we can manufacture some and the rest of it comes from the gut. The fact is, commerce and the state that it is in today, we sort of exist in this trust gap. Now, I should remind you that the oversimplification is still happening. Let's talk a little bit about blockchain to get a sense as to what blockchain is and what it does. As you would imagine, blockchain has a ledger as well. Now, the blockchain ledger is an epic upgrade on the ledger that we have today. There's a couple of things that are very, very interesting about it. The first thing that's interesting about the blockchain ledger is every record that's written on a blockchain ledger has a unique key that goes with it. Now, you don't need to get into the details of cryptography or hash keys, etc. Just trust me when I tell you that there's a really, really awesome, unhackable key that's in every record on a blockchain ledger. The other thing that happens to blockchain is that every record is written and stamped by the trusted party that wrote that record. Aha! You can see how this is a little bit different from the crappy ledger we use today, isn't it? Here's the major invention. When the next record is written, everything from the first record, including the key, and the contents of the second record is put into that formula, and out comes a key for the second record. You can see there's some dependency now. When the third record is written, the third record, the same thing happens. All of the contents of record number 1, including the key, and the contents of record number 2, including the key, goes into the formula, and out comes a key for the third record. You can see how the dependency from one record to another is different from what we do today. Now, again, we're in the oversimplification zone. There's going to be a lot of comments about cryptography and hash keys. Yes, all that is important, but this is the fundamental difference. And this happens on and on and on and on. Essentially, technology making sure that every single record, we can see who wrote the record, we can add a key to that record, and we can build dependencies between one record and another, essentially chaining all of the records together. Aha! Now you see where the word chain comes from. in blockchain. And here's what happens. If someone that doesn't like that failed chimney inspection decides to remove that, very quickly with an algorithm, you can apply it and look at the information and recognize that it was tampered with. That is the difference between how we exist today as commerce and how we will exist tomorrow in the future. Essentially, we're in a world where we can start to take advantage of a ledger that is immutable. Meaning, yes, you can mess with it, but it's really easy to tell the ones that were tampered with as opposed to the ones that are not tampered with. Now, blockchains usually exist in what is called communities. What you find is that participants that operate in an industry will all operate on the same chain so that each participant in that industry has a copy of the information so they can write to the ledger with each other. Now, this helps the sharing, this helps the transaction throughput, etc. You could call this the real estate chain, if I may. We're still talking about that house that we're buying. Obviously, there's going to be healthcare chain, there's going to be financial services chains, there'll be all industry chains, and eventually we'll see a chain of chains. Now, if someone happens to interfere with one of those ledgers, let's say something happens, a consensus algorithm runs, looks at all the rest of ledgers and says, hey, you're the one that's out. And it gets replaced by a copy of those that still has the good information. New blocks of transactions appear. They get written on top of the collection of ledger. New blocks of transactions appear. They get written on top of it. And eventually, we get into a situation where what you're looking at is what is called a distributed immutable ledger. I want to pause and make sure we take inventory. We talked about inventions, large paradigms, trust, a trust gap, how we bridge that trust gap today with ledgers that we can tamper with, and now we're looking at a completely different ledger, one that is immutable, shared across organizations that operate on a specific chain, and now distributed. If you look on the left side of this chart, you see a state of commerce that uses ledgers that are tamperable, requiring intermediaries that own a centralized copy of it, that broker the relationship between those who are looking for trust and those who are looking to be trusted. And as a result, we live in this trust gap. On the right-hand side of this is a different view of commerce, a view of commerce where information can be trusted and available in real time. Now, I want you to think about this house that we were buying. Can you imagine if the information about the ownership rights of this house was written on a blockchain? How much time would that take out of the process to get the title information right? How much friction would it take out? And how much fraud would it take out? Much less the cost. This is the power of blockchain. Now, we saw that in the large paradigms that we looked at, we saw things like the printing press destroy those organizations that were only anointed with knowledge. We saw the combustion engine destroy things like colonialism and slavery. We saw the internet come in and destroy brick and mortar companies. What we're looking at today is a new invention called blockchain that changes the way we trust. And I believe trust companies are going to destroy, at a minimum, these intermediaries. We will simply trust in a different way. The human experience is going to change as fundamentally as it changed from the printing press, from the combustion engine, and from the creation of the internet.
The technology likely to have the greatest impact on the next few decades has arrived. And it's not social media, it's not big data, it's not robotics, it's not even AI. And you'll be surprised to learn that it's the underlying technology of digital currencies like Bitcoin. It's called the blockchain. Blockchain. Now, it's not the most sonorous word in the world, but I believe that this is now the next generation of the internet, and that it holds vast promise for every business, every society, and for all of you individually. You know, for the past few decades, we've had the internet of information. And when I send you an email or a PowerPoint file or something, I'm actually not sending you the original, I'm sending you a copy. And that's great. This is democratized information. But when it comes to assets, things like money, financial assets like stocks and bonds, loyalty points, intellectual property, music, art, a vote, carbon credit, and other assets, sending you a copy is a really bad idea. If I send you $100, it's really important that I don't still have the money and that I can't send it to you. So this has been called the double spend problem by cryptographers for a long time. So today, we rely entirely on big intermediaries, middlemen like banks, government, big social media companies, credit card companies, and so on, to establish trust in our economy. And these intermediaries perform all the business and transaction logic of every kind of commerce, from authentication, identification of people, through to clearing, settling, and record keeping. And overall, they do a pretty good job, but there are growing problems. To begin, they're centralized. That means that they can be hacked, and increasingly are. And JP Morgan, US federal government, LinkedIn, Home Depot, and others found that out the hard way. They exclude billions of people from the global economy. For example, people who don't have enough money to have a bank account. They slow things down. It can take a second for an email to go around the world, but it can take days or weeks for money to move through the banking system across the city. And they take a big piece of the action, 10 to 20%, just to send money to another country. They capture our data, and that means that we can't monetize it or use it to better manage our lives. And our privacy is being undermined. And the biggest problem is that overall, they've appropriated the largesse of the digital age asymmetrically. And we have wealth creation, but we have growing social inequality. So what if there were not only an internet of information, what if there were an internet of value? Some kind of vast, global, distributed ledger running on millions of computers and available to everybody, and where every kind of asset, from money to music, could be stored, moved, transacted, exchanged, and managed, all without powerful intermediaries. What if there were a native medium for value? Well, in 2008, the financial industry crashed, and perhaps propitiously, an unknown or anonymous person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto created a paper where he developed a protocol for a digital cash that used an underlying cryptocurrency called Bitcoin. And this cryptocurrency enabled people to establish trust and do transactions without a third party. And the seemingly simple act set off a spark that's ignited the world, that has everyone excited or terrified or otherwise interested in many places. Now, don't be confused about Bitcoin, okay? Bitcoin is an asset. It goes up and down, and that should be of interest to you if you're a speculator. More broadly, it's a cryptocurrency. It's not a fiat currency controlled by a nation state, and that's of greater interest. But the real pony here is the underlying technology. It's called blockchain. So, for the first time now in human history, people everywhere can trust each other and transact peer-to-peer. And trust is established not by some big institution, but by collaboration, by cryptography, and by some clever code. And because trust is native to the technology, I call this the trust protocol. Now, you're probably wondering, well, how does this thing work? Fair enough. Assets, digital assets like money to music and everything in between, are not stored in a central place, but they're distributed across a global ledger using the highest level of cryptography. And when a transaction is conducted, it's posted globally across millions and millions of computers. And out there around the world is a group of people called miners. These are not young people, they're Bitcoin miners. And they have massive computing power at their fingertips, 10 to 100 times bigger than all of Google worldwide. And these miners do a lot of work. And every 10 minutes, kind of like the heartbeat of a network, a block gets created that has all the transactions from the previous 10 minutes. And then the miners get to work trying to solve some tough problems. And they compete. And the first miner to find out the truth and to validate the block is rewarded in digital currency, in the case of the Bitcoin blockchain with Bitcoin. And then, this is the key part, that block is linked to the previous block and the previous block to create a chain of blocks. And everyone is timestamped, kind of like with a digital wax seal. So if I wanted to go and hack a block and say, pay you and you with the same money, I'd have to hack that block, plus all the preceding blocks, the entire history of commerce on that blockchain, not just on one computer, but across millions of computers simultaneously, all using the highest levels of encryption in the light of the most powerful computing resource in the world that's watching me. Tough to do. And this is infinitely more secure than the computer systems that we have today. Blockchain, that's how it works. So the Bitcoin blockchain is just one. There are many. The Ethereum blockchain was developed by a Canadian named Vitalik Buterin. He's 19 years old. And this blockchain has some extraordinary capabilities. One of them is that you can build smart contracts. It's kind of what it sounds like. It's a contract that self-executes. And the contract handles the enforcement and the management, performance, and payment. The contract kind of has a bank account, too, in a sense, of agreements between people. And today, on the Ethereum blockchain, there are projects underway to do everything from create a new replacement for the stock market to create a new model of democracy where politicians are accountable to citizens. So, to understand what a radical change this is going to bring, let's look at one industry, financial services. You recognize this? Rube Goldberg machine. It's a ridiculously complicated machine that does something really simple, like crack an egg or shut a door. Well, kind of reminds me of the financial services industry, honestly. I mean, you tap your card in the corner store, and a bit stream goes through a dozen companies, and each with their own computer systems, some of them being 1970s mainframes, older than many of the people in this room. And 3 days later, a settlement occurs. Well, with a blockchain financial industry, there would be no settlement because the payment and the settlement is the same activity. It's just a change in the ledger. So Wall Street and all around the world, the financial industry is in a big upheaval about this, wondering, can we be replaced, or how do we embrace this technology for success? Now, why should you care? Well, let me describe some applications. Prosperity. The first era of the Internet of information, brought us wealth, but not shared prosperity, because social inequality is growing. And this is at the heart of all of the anger and extremism and protectionism and xenophobia and worse that we're seeing growing in the world today. Brexit being the most recent case. So, could we develop some new approaches to this problem of inequality? Because the only approach today is to redistribute wealth, tax people and spread it around more. Could we pre-distribute wealth? Could we change the way that wealth gets created in the first place by democratizing wealth creation, engaging more people in the economy, and in ensuring that they got fair compensation? Let me describe 5 ways that this can be done. Number 1, did you know that 70% of the people in the world who have land have a tenuous title to it? So you got a little farm in Honduras, some dictator comes to power, he says, I know you got a piece of paper that says you own your farm, but the government computer says my friend owned your farm. This happened on a mass scale in Honduras, and this problem exists everywhere. Hernando de Soto, the great Latin American economist, says this is the #1 issue in the world in terms of economic mobility, more important than having a bank account. Because if you don't have a valid title to your land, you can't borrow against it, and you can't plan for the future. So today, companies are working with governments to put land titles on a blockchain. And once it's there, this is immutable. You can't hack it. This creates the conditions for prosperity for potentially billions of people. Secondly, a lot of writers talk about Uber and Airbnb and TaskRabbit and Lyft and so on as part of the sharing economy. This is a very powerful idea that peers can come together and create and share wealth. My view is that these companies are not really sharing. In fact, they're successful precisely because they don't share. They aggregate services together and they sell them. What if rather than Airbnb being a $25 billion corporation, there was a distributed application on a blockchain? We'll call it B Airbnb. And it was essentially owned by all of the people who have a room to rent. And when someone wants to rent a room, they go onto the blockchain database and all the criteria sift through, help them find the right room. And then the blockchain helps with the contracting. It identifies the party. It handles the payments, just through digital payments are built into the system. And it even handles reputation, because if she rates a room as a 5-star room, that room is there, and it's rated, and it's immutable. So the big sharing economy disruptors in Silicon Valley could be disrupted, and this would be good for prosperity. Number 3, the biggest flow of funds from the developed world to the developing world is not corporate investment, and it's not even foreign aid. It's remittances. This is the global diaspora, people who've left their ancestral lands, and they're sending money back to their families at home. This is $600 billion a year, and it's growing, and these people are getting ripped off. Annalee Domingo is a housekeeper, and she lives in Toronto, and every month she goes to the Western Union office with some cash to send her remittances to her mom in Manila. It costs her around 10%. The money takes 4 to 7 days to get there. Her mom never knows when it's going to arrive. It takes 5 hours out of her week to do this. 6 months ago, Annalee Domingo used a blockchain application called Abra. And from her mobile device, she said $300 went directly to her mom's mobile device without going through an intermediary. And then her mom looked at her mobile device, and it's kind of like an Uber interface. There's Abra tellers moving around. She clicks on a teller that's a 5-star teller. He's 7 minutes away. The guy shows up at the door, gives her Filipino pesos. She puts them in her wallet. The whole thing took minutes, and it cost her 2%. This is a big opportunity for prosperity. Number 4, the most powerful asset of the digital age is data. And data is really a new asset class, maybe bigger than previous asset classes like land under the agrarian economy or an industrial plant, or even money. And all of you, we create this data. We create this asset. And we leave this trail of digital crumbs behind us as we go throughout life. And these crumbs are collected into a mirror image of you, the virtual you. And the virtual you may know more about you than you do, because you can't remember what you bought a year ago or said a year ago or your exact location a year ago. And the virtual you is not owned by you. That's the big problem. So today there are companies working to create an identity in a black box. The virtual you owned by you. And this black box moves around with you as you travel throughout the world, and it's very, very stingy. It only gives away the shred of information that's required to do something. A lot of transactions, the seller doesn't even need to know who you are. They just need to know that they got paid. And then this avatar is sweeping up all this data and enabling you to monetize it. And this is a wonderful thing, because it can also help us protect our privacy. And privacy is the foundation of a free society. Let's get this asset that we create back under our control, where we can own our own identity and manage it responsibly. Finally, number 5, there are a whole number of creators of content who don't receive fair compensation because the system for intellectual property is broken. It was broken by the first era of the internet. Take music. Musicians are left with crumbs at the end of the whole food chain. You know, if you're a songwriter, 25 years ago you wrote a hit song, it got 1 million singles, you could get royalties of around $45,000. Today you're a songwriter, you write a hit song, it gets 1 million streams, you don't get $45K, you get $36. Enough to buy a nice pizza. So Imogen Heap, the Grammy-winning singer-songwriter, is now putting music on a blockchain ecosystem. She calls it mycelium. And the music has a smart contract surrounding it. And the music protects her intellectual property rights. If you want to listen to the song, it's free, or maybe it's a few microcents flow into a digital account. You want to put the song in your movie, that's different, and the IP rights are all specified. You want to make a ringtone, that's different. She describes that the song becomes a business. It's out there on this platform, marketing itself, protecting the rights of the author, and because the song has a payment system, in a sense a bank account, all the money flows back to the artist, and they control the industry rather than these powerful intermediaries. Now this is not just songwriters, it's any creator of content, like art, inventions, scientific discoveries, journalists. There are all kinds of people who don't get fair compensation, and with blockchains, they're going to be able to make it rain on the blockchain, and that's a wonderful thing. So, these are 5 opportunities out of a dozen to solve one problem, prosperity, which is one of countless problems that blockchains are applicable to. Now, technology doesn't create prosperity, of course, people do. But my case to you is that, once again, the technology genie has escaped from the bottle, and it was summoned by an unknown person or persons at this uncertain time in human history, and it's giving us another kick at the can, another opportunity to rewrite the economic power grid and the old order of things, and to solve some of the world's most difficult problems, if we will it. Thank you.